views and opinions expressed in this program are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect the views of BronxNet or the program underwriters.
Good evening and welcome to BronxTalk. Tonight, it's the debate for the Democratic primary in the 78th Assembly District, a district that includes the Bronx neighborhoods of Fordham, Kingsbridge, Belmont, and Bedford Park. The incumbent is Assemblyman Jose Rivera, who served in this seat from 1982 to 87, and after a stint in the City Council, was re-elected to the seat in the Assembly in 2000. The challenger is Aisha Bravo, a longtime executive director of the Bronx County Democratic Committee. Tonight's debate is co-sponsored by the League of Women's Voters, a nonpartisan political organization that advocates for informed and active participation in government and works to increase understanding of major public policy issues. We are thrilled to have them on board. The primary election is Tuesday, September 13th, and all eligible voters are, of course, encouraged to vote. Unfortunately, while both candidates were invited to be with us tonight, only one, the challenger, Ms. Bravo, accepted our invitation. So unfortunately, Mr. Rivera will not be here tonight. As a side note, he also chose to not appear in a debate for this seat that was scheduled 2 years ago. By our long-standing policy, as a result, Ms. Bravo will be interviewed alone on the program tonight. We certainly regret his absence. But nonetheless, you are here. Good evening, Ms. Bravo. And bravo to you for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for joining us. Let's just start with a very basic question. Why run? Why would you like to become an Assembly member in the 78th?
Well, I've dedicated my whole adult life to public service, and I've seen this community decline, and I no longer want to see it decline. I want to see it progress. And this is a community that's seen me grow, and I want an opportunity to grow it.
Mm-hmm. Talk about, and we'll review many of these things, but talk about the things that you see that are in decline that you want to take a look at and think you can have impact on.
Education is a big deal to me as a parent, as a resident of the district. I see that in decline. As I engage with voters, I notice that that's one of the biggest issues among families. I also see an issue of affordable housing and the fact that the maintenance of the housing is not being kept up in the district. That's a big deal to me. Making sure that more jobs are coming into the district as well. Mm-hmm.
Mr. Rivera has been in elected office for more than 3 decades. He's amassed numerous contacts and associations in Albany and here in the Bronx. How can a newcomer possibly come in and then provide for the constituents in a better way than he has, given all of his experience?
I guess I beg to differ on that one. I think that given the experience doesn't necessarily apply to the time. It's not quantity. It's quantity versus quality here. And unfortunately, in the years of service, the community has not seen that quality of service. And I, as a newcomer, I don't like to see myself as so, considering that I've been entrenched for a long time in this community and in politics. I think that 90% of an elected official's job is organizing. And that's something that I'm very good at. And I think that listening to the constituency and advocating for them and being that strong voice in Albany will make me a force to be working with.
Mm-hmm. He would, if he were here, I'm sure, talk about his background as an organizer and many years ago. He's not here, so I'm not going to quote his resume, but I certainly know him, like many people do, for a very long time. And he would talk about all the groups he's organized and things that he's done. What makes you think you could do a better job at doing that would benefit the constituents?
Well, I've lived in the district my whole life, like I stated earlier, and I can attest to those organizing events that he's put together. I think that the district hasn't seen that in a long time. And I don't see the effect that he's had in the community. As a person of color in this community, I think that there's more that could be done. And he hasn't used his organizational skills in a long time, at least my time there.
Mm-hmm. You're not exactly a newcomer to Bronx politics, as I called you a newcomer, because if you were to be elected into Albany, you would be.
Right.
Your website says that you helped guide the Bronx Democratic Organization as a beacon of democratic principles to the rest of the city, the state, and the nation. Many people would disagree with that. They would say, you know what, the Bronx County Democratic Organization, every time there was a grassroots candidate, they challenged them, many times lawyered them literally off the ballot, and used in many cases some very heavy-handed tactics, certainly throughout the period of time you were the executive director over there. What would make you think that what your website says is true, that this is a beacon of democratic principles?
Well, let's backtrack in time, right? Jose was the previous chairman of the Democratic Party, and it wasn't an accessible party. It wasn't open to the public. It was open just around elections. And when we took over, I wanted to make it more civically oriented. I didn't want the elected officials to just be there around that time where they come around with the green papers to collect petitions. I wanted people to be made aware that the Democratic Party is also a family party. So we organized many events that were family oriented. We organized drives to register people to vote, and did many social media events where people will come in and meet their elected officials. At least as it relates to me, I made sure that people were included, and it was a democratic process. Now, because it is a democratic process, everybody has a right to challenge the opponent and the other way around. That's pretty much what the party does. But my role was to make sure that people weren't tuned and knew who their electeds were.
Did you get challenged out of curiosity in the same way that maybe some of the tactics worked in the other direction when you weren't the object of them?
I did. There were general objections filed against me, but nothing was pursued. My petitions were very good.
What did you learn from that experience, both good and bad? Are there things that you say, gee whiz, I learned that from working in the county organization that I would never do and never want to follow? Did you see things that, frankly, you don't approve of? And then, of course, on the other side are the things that you say, oh, that was a good idea. I think I'd like to work on that or perpetuate that.
Well, it was definitely a privilege and an honor to work with Carl Hasty. He was a consensus builder. That's something that I appreciated from him. He wasn't a dictator. He didn't impose anything on anyone. He went around and he built a consensus. I learned that to represent our community, we have to stand up, and that's something that I'm doing now. I respect the institution, but I respect my community, and it deserves better representation. So one thing that they showed me was that if I believe in something strongly enough, I have to stand up.
Is it somewhat ironic that here you are, in other words, one would think if you have an executive director who works for a county organization and then that person goes to seek office, you could then expect maybe and now the Speaker of the Assembly or some of the others would come out and support you. But of course, in the Bronx, it seems that they always support the incumbent. Surprising to you that some of your friends or people you work with closely did not come out and support you? What do you think of that?
Not at all. I'm not upset. I still consider myself a loyal Democrat and part of the family. The organization has its pretenses that it endorses the incumbents, and I'm okay with that. This is not about the organization. This is about a community that deserves representation. So I'm not upset. They made a choice, and so did I.
Let's talk about some of the issues that are out there. There are so many. I mean, you listed a couple in education and housing and everything else, development. I want to talk about the building that is not too far from where we are, where BronxNet is at the Lehman College Studios, and that is the Kingsbridge Armory. Incredibly, it is still standing there dormant. There is that protracted legal squabble. The city has not released the lease. Who do you side with? Should the city release the lease, or should they continue to insist that the Kingsbridge National Ice Center developers show further proof of financial support?
I think it should be released. I think at this point the community has been waiting for progress. And I think that having the Kingsbridge Armory continue to function, whether it's the ice skating rink or whatever project at this point, it would be the ice skating rink, making sure that the CBA, the Community Benefits Agreement, is enforced. So I think it should be moved on already at this point. It's been 20 years in conversations of whether it's going to be a school, it's going to be this, and finally we're at this point. And I think that the community deserves some stability.
Hasn't Mr. Rivera been a passionate supporter of that project, and maybe you want to evaluate how he's done? I mean, is there something, if you were in that position then, during the time that decisions were being made, that you would do maybe differently from what he did?
Yeah, it's my understanding that he allocated some funding for the ceiling when it was leaking, and that was pretty much the extent of advocacy when it came to the Kingsbridge Armory. I would have definitely done a lot more. I would have definitely reached out to the community leadership, groups, and see what they wanted to see come out of the Kingsbridge Armory, and been a vocal advocate for that. And I guarantee it would not have been 20 years later completely sitting there, like you said, dormant.
Would you have advocated when the idea for the Ice Center came up? Would you have advocated for that? Or, of course, way back when there was the dialogue about having a mall and related companies involved in that. I think there was also, which we analyzed on the show, a proposal for what is now going to be happening at the General Post Office on 149th Street. Would you, of those, did you have a choice? Which would you think would be best? Or would you rather have seen something else at the Armory?
I think we all could have probably seen something else, maybe more schools, something more centered around the community. But we're at a point where now we're at the skating rink, and now we need to do what's best for the community. Would I have advocated for something else then? Probably, I'm not sure. I would have been more well-versed, would have been more entrenched, and would have seen what the CBA would have meant for the community. I think overall, I think that's something that matters. What does it mean for the community?
Among the many concerns of people in the area is that this will, of course, raise prices. There is some anecdotal evidence that businesses are having their leases shortened, or at least not having them renewed for a very long time, or in some cases they're being pushed out because the anticipation of having this rather large project literally across the street. And certainly there is some evidence of landlords doing the same with rents, anticipating that they'll be able to get more money. What can be done to allay those fears and say, well, here's a project that you clearly support, that we think is a good idea, but will not hurt the people who have been waiting so long for something like this to happen?
Well, we need to anchor our small businesses. We need to make sure that they have some protection within the state or in the city level. So I think providing the resources and education to our small businesses to be able to stand alone, and educating our landlords that they need to be part of the community, making sure that we empower them, well, those small businesses in that.
A lot of people talk about empowering small businesses. This dialogue, I mean, I've certainly hosted it any number of times in any number of forums here on the program. Talk about the Fordham Shopping District, the Kingsbridge Shopping District, and any other areas in the 78th that you want. What can be done to improve them, to make sure there are less vacant properties, et cetera, et cetera?
Well, Fordham is definitely the highlight. It's one of the busiest strips that the city has.
Yeah, I think it's the longest running shopping strip in the city, as a matter of fact. I'm sorry.
Right.
Interrupt.
And in Kingsbridge, unfortunately, like you mentioned earlier, I mean, we have a decline in small businesses where they're just, a lot of them are vacant. Like my campaign office is on Kingsbridge, so I see that firsthand. And we definitely need to do better at providing these services to the small businesses. How can we expand? We definitely need to grow our tourism. Maybe partnering up with the Bronx Tourism Council and see how we can put this all together.
When you talk about tourism, one presumably you think
I have Belmont, right?
Armory. Or you're talking about Belmont as well?
Right, I have Belmont, and Fordham is considered a shopping district, right? People come here from all over. Where they travel, they come to Fordham. The same thing with Belmont when it's the eatery.
When you, let's say you are elected, okay, and so then the idea of the Kingsbridge Merchants Association comes around and others say, what can we do to help? What are you going to tell them?
What can I do to help them?
To help them? What are you going to tell them?
Empowering them, making sure that the state provides the resources for them, education. I think a lot of our small businesses are afraid or have lack of knowledge, and they're afraid of these big stores coming in and not being able to compete. I think we should be able to provide or allocate some capital money for them or technology money for them to be able to compete. Mm-hmm. You know, you have stores that you can order online. Maybe we can teach our small businesses on how to be able to have these things, mm-hmm. and in turn grow as well.
Let's talk a little bit about housing. You talked about, it's on your website certainly, and you mentioned the idea of affordable housing in that district as well. The mayor has a plan to build 200,000 units of housing. Let's start there. Is he doing the right thing? Are you pleased the way that it's progressing? She's nodding her head no, so I already got part of the answer that I was looking for. But tell me a little bit about the mayor's plan as a jumping off point to improving affordable housing in the 78th AD.
Well, I applaud the mayor for being the first mayor to have a conversation, right, about affordable housing, because it's long-term coming. But I agree with the borough president. I think that the one-size-fits-all is definitely not something that is applicable to us here in the Bronx, let alone across the 5 boroughs. So there's more conversations that need to happen around that. We can't consider the AMI to be the same across the city of New York and include 2 counties in Westchester. That's just not applicable to us. Housing is a dear subject to me. I'm a product of public housing, so I understand firsthand the needs and the hardships people go through. But affordable housing and housing in general needs a lot of help. You have slumlords that just don't deal with the tenants right. I mean, I door knock every day and I engage with people and I see how they live. And it's just not acceptable that the fact that these landlords are not making the repairs that they should.
Who gets on them? How do we structure? I mean, it's one thing for you to call somebody up and say, hey, could you get it done? But it's another thing to really get action out of it. How do you get landlords to fix their buildings?
Well, you have to empower the tenants. I think it's taking away the fear that they have. You know, I have a growing immigrant population and some of them are in fear of losing their tenancy. And it's just empowering them, educating them, making sure that we bring in these good organizers. I have a good organizing group right on Kingsbridge, the Northwest Clergy Coalition. They do a great job at empowering tenants. And I think by empowering the tenants, in turn, you force the landlord to do what he needs to do. Mm-hmm. And also strengthening the laws.
Like what kind of law would you strengthen?
Oh, they're fines. Increasing the fines, absolutely. Increasing fines, making sure that the tenants are protected, protecting tenants' rights, making them stronger.
You mentioned public housing, that's your origins. What do you think about the idea, the mayor's idea to use land on public housing for private development?
As of right now, I'm not in agreement with it. Mm-hmm. I would have to see how that progresses to see if it's beneficial.
What in that process would you like? What would you like to see? What could be done, or is anything able to be done with that land in public housing?
I would like to see what his plans are and what that would mean for the current residents.
Mm-hmm. In some cases,
NYCHA's in a deficit right now. Like they need money. I get that, but we need to see what that means for the tenants and the fixtures. They're obviously way behind.
Let's talk about schools. You say it's a big issue for you. You have children. What should be done? What could be done to improve the schools in the 78th AD?
Well, for starters, I think the state needs to start paying what it owes the city of New York. Just allocating 1/3 of what's owed every year, it just grows into a further cesspool at this point. And our schools are in lack of funding, and we clearly see that. Our kids need better resources in order to be better educated, and that's an issue that we have now. And that's an issue that I hear from every parent when I knock on the doors. Like, they're not equipped to take care of my special needs child, or they have to send them to a school that is far away in order to provide those services. And I think that that's unacceptable.
Where do you put the monies? If you were to, or if the state were to say, okay, now here's whatever the amount of money you think needs to be allocated, here's more money for schools, what do you do? Where do you put that money?
Oh, to making sure that the overcrowding is taken care of, making sure that the right resources are going into the schools, making sure that every child, there's a seat for every child, and I don't mean that in the literal form, I mean like every special needs child is being properly taken care of and not having to go 10 miles to another school.
What's your opinion of the cap on charter schools? This has been a long-running debate in the state legislature. There is a cap on the number of charter schools. Would you like to see that cap lifted? Would you like it to see it lowered? Or do you like the idea of where it is right now?
I think my focus would be around public education, making sure that our public schools have what they deserve. And then we can focus on everything else. Right now, there's a clear issue that our public schools are not being funded properly. They're falling behind. And before we can deal with another section in that part of education, I think we need to deal with our public schools.
Are you a supporter of Common Core?
No.
Okay.
I have to deal with this at home. I have a 9-year-old.
Explain why, and what would you put in its place, or how would you then restructure the interior of our educational system?
As I see my son go through this and some of the teachers complain in his school, I think that it needs to be restructured to the point that it's hard. In plain language, it's just hard for these kids. I think that it needs to be more in plain language so they can understand. I think the teachers need to be educated more on how to teach this, because I think that's another issue. There isn't enough time for them to do their daily work, their daily routine in school, in addition to have to teach these kids for the Common Core in a certain amount of time.
Talk about all these ideas, whether you talk about providing for small business owners and getting them technical advice, trying to get more money for schools, technical advice for tenant associations. What's the process that an assembly member, especially a freshman potentially, would have to go through to really make some of that actually happen?
Well, I mean, you're a freshman because I'm newly elected, but I wouldn't be a freshman in the district, right? And I think it's a matter of rolling up your sleeves and being an organizer yourself. So it's not so much of the title, it's about the ability and capability and where your heart is and how much you care about your district. And it's a matter of partnering up with your local council member and your senator to strengthen the community.
An assembly member, I presume. Of course.
Yes.
Let's talk about ethics in Albany. One of the main concerns of voters right now is because they see it, certainly even with Bronx elected officials, that they go to jail, they're being investigated for X, Y, and Z. There was significant disappointment in the results of the legislature's actions on ethics, only getting a pension forfeiture for those committing of crimes. The LLC loophole is still there. Electeds can still take in outside income. What can a freshman assembly member do to move the needle forward?
Advocate. Be vocal and stand up for change, especially coming in, granted elected. I would be the representation of change. I will be the embodiment of change. So it's gathering the colleagues and making them understand that this is the right thing to do. We need to restore the faith of voters, and clearly it's been lost for obvious reasons.
What do you suggest? Do you like the idea of eliminating outside income for elected officials?
Absolutely. I think it's a conflict of interest, especially if you're an attorney. You have to you have to step away from certain committees. It's a complete impediment for you to function fully.
In terms of working with others, I mean, you want to be an advocate, and in many cases, again, I don't want to overemphasize it, but potentially being a freshman in Albany, you're going to step in and people are going to say, well, you don't have a lot of wherewithal, you don't have a lot of authority, you certainly don't have the experience in the legislature. I know you're proud of your own political experience and otherwise. Talk to me about getting along with others so that maybe if you don't totally agree with something, you can still move, as I said before, move the needle forward.
Well, I have a good relationship with the existing Bronx County elected officials, and
even though they're not supporting you in this case.
Absolutely, absolutely. This is not personal. This is a decision to represent a community in terms of a collective team. I think that we'll work well together. I mean, I've had a working relationship for the past 14 years, and I don't think that this is going to be an impediment. I have no problem holding hands for the better of the community in the state of New York.
Mm-hmm. One of the biggest issues in the Bronx, and certainly the 78th Assembly District is no difference, is about health and people's health outcomes. The health outcomes, despite the fact that the Bronx has more health and the largest industry in the Bronx is healthcare, despite that fact, we have the worst health outcomes. How do we move the needle forward? How do we change that?
I think healthy eating is a big thing, right? I know in my district they've been doing a lot of farmers market events over at Poe Park. We just need to do more of that. We need to educate our folks the importance of eating healthy. But one of the biggest issues that I find is that it's cheaper to buy your kid a hot dog, right, than to buy them a healthy meal. So we need to find a cost-effective way to be able to feed our children and feed our families, and not just, you know, after the fact, after you have diabetes, after you have the sickness, to start eating healthy. I think we need to do some preventive care by providing healthier choices to our families.
How do you do that? Where do you do that? Do you do in the street? Do you do it in the schools? How do you create a different attitude toward nutrition and toward healthy eating?
I think it starts at schools. I mean, we're doing a good job now bringing some of the farmers markets to come in, people that have food stamps to buy these healthy eating food. But I think in the schools, educating our kids, educating the parents. I mean, now that we have the community schools, that we can bring this component in, making sure we provide those
One
services.
of the biggest issues in many neighborhoods in the Bronx is access to nutritious food and healthy food. In so many neighborhoods, the only place that you can go buy food is, you know, in the local deli or the bodega on the corner. How can that be impacted?
Maybe we can provide incentives. That's a conversation that we can definitely have. Maybe providing the local bodega owner with an incentive to be able to bring in a certain amount of healthy foods for people to have an option out of cost effective for everybody.
you get elected, hypothetically, you get elected to office, and then you go in, you get acclimated, you get your first introduction to the assembly, and then one day all that is done, the door closes, you're alone in your office, and you sit there, the phones are there, the computers are there, the constituents are back in the Bronx somewhere. What are the first things you do, and what is the first thing that you would work on?
Granted elected.
Say it again?
Granted elected, God willing.
Yes, well, that's what we're presuming here, I suppose.
On my plan to fix the district, to make sure that voters are aware that they have someone that's going to work for them.
And how do you do that? How do you indicate that? You pick up the phone? You do something?
No.
What do you do?
It's just like election day. You door knock and you reintroduce yourself. Like, hey, remember I door knocked and I asked you for your vote. I'm here now to introduce myself as the member, and I'm here at your service. What do you need? And it's also backtracking to remember those buildings that you door knocked that needed the help, and making sure that you provide those services. It's not just walking away from election day. It's continuing the work from election day. I think that's important.
Many of our elected officials, I'm going to take that one step further, and this will be the last question. Many of our elected officials, in essence, do that to get elected, and then they are nowhere to be found. Is it difficult to, give yourself that kind of presence in a district, especially when, let's face it, you really got to go back and forth to Albany?
I don't think it's difficult at all. I think that it's easy when you live in the district. It's easy when you know the district. It's easy when you can coexist in the district and you shop in the district and you can speak to your constituency and understand the issues. But it's also good when you have a good team that's going to be present at local community boards, at precinct council, that's going to have that presence even when you're in Albany. So no, I don't think it's hard. It's just a matter of putting in the work and having the intentions of doing good work.
I'll give you 15 seconds. Anything, last thing you want to say before we have to wrap it up?
I encourage everyone to come and exercise their civic duty and come out on September 13th to vote for the better candidate. And I consider myself the better candidate because I'm going to sit here and put in the work that unfortunately has not been put into the district. 34 years of public service, and unfortunately the community has not seen the fruit of that. We have the lowest voter turnout in the state of New York, let alone within the 5 boroughs, and that's unacceptable. I'm looking to restore the faith of the voters, and I'm looking forward to working from my family to theirs.
Aisha Bravo, thank you so much. Good luck in the rest of your campaign. I know you agree with me that everyone should come out to vote on September 13th. We should tell viewers to please note that it is a primary election, so only registered voters enrolled in the Democratic Party in the 78th can vote in this race. Also, please note that October 14th is the last date to register to vote in the November 8th national election. It's also the last date to enroll in a party for all 2017 primary elections, which will include the primaries for mayor, controller, public advocate, borough presidents, and the city council. Also, we want to thank our co-sponsors, the League of Women Voters. For more information, you can call the League at 212-725-3541. Now, next week, we'll host a debate for state senate in the 36th senatorial district. That's the seat previously held by Ruth Hassel Thompson. There are 5 candidates in that race, and we expect they will all be with us. So thank you for watching. Thank you to Aisha Bravo.
Thank you for having me.
And thanks to our producer, Yela Duberis, also to director Autumn Vasquez. And again, please make sure to vote on September 13th. Good night.